All right, hello everyone. We're going to get started here in just a minute. So as people are coming along and getting online, give us about a minute or so and then we'll get started. All right, let's go ahead and get going. Hello everyone again, and welcome to today's Biz Essentials webinar. I am Amy Stark, Director of Administration for FCSI the Americas, and we're super excited to have you here with us again this month for Biz Essentials. A couple of announcements again before we get started. For today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature on your screen. If you have any questions, we'll take those toward the end, but I'd love to see them as you have them throughout the presentation, and we'll come back to them toward the end. Remember, if you miss anything on today's webinar or ever want to watch a webinar that we've done previously, they are always available on the FCSI the Americas website on the Biz Essentials webpage. So let's get going. This month's sponsor is Continental Refrigeration, and we're going to hear from them right now.
Energy efficient solutions with Continental Refrigerator, recognized for innovation in energy efficient product design and an outstanding commitment to Energy Star education. Our refrigeration systems combine innovation and versatility with the Continental Refrigerator quality you've come to expect. Continental is not only building better units, but also smarter products, providing greater energy efficiency and reliability. In addition to converting to a greener alternative, R290 hydrocarbon refrigerant, we have researched, tested, and built into our products the highest quality, energy efficient, and sustainable components, such as compressors, condensing fans, condensing coils, expansion valve systems, evaporator coils, and motors. Continental Refrigerator also prides itself in delivering feature-rich, flexible solutions that provide real operator benefits right out of the box. Since 1989, Continental has earned a reputation for innovation and excellence through our commitment to teamwork, energy-efficient product strategies, and to our policy of always placing customer satisfaction above all else. Our products are American-made, designed for flexibility, engineered for food safety, and tested for optimal performance. It's not just about building a product, it's about building a product that lasts in real kitchen environments.
Okay, thank you again, Continental Refrigerator, for sponsoring this month's event. And now I'd like to welcome today's speaker, who most of you probably know. Kathleen Held is CEO and President of Sini Little. She is a certified professional service marketer with 25 years of experience. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, Amy. I'm very excited to be presenting on the topic of RFPs and how to read them. Actually, the idea for this session came up during a committee call with some members who had actually asked me to do a presentation on how to read an RFP. So the RFP process actually can be confusing. I love to start off conversations about the RFP process by looking at this cartoon, because oftentimes when we begin the RFP process, we talk about what we think the client needs and how the RFP describes it. And then we end up, down here with what's in our proposal, the really nice chair swing, and all the client really wants is this tire swing over here. And it's all about the interpretation of the RFP. So before we begin talking about the RFP process, there's actually 3 common types of requests that we get. So there's the request for proposal, and this is actually one of the more typical types of requests that we get. You can see by my little backpacker over here with this little heavy backpack. These are typically the bigger requests. They're much more formal. They have typically a formal question and answer period. There's usually a contract included in the RFP. And then we have the RFQ, which is the request for qualifications. RFQs typically come out when they're attached to government-funded projects. The government actually has to make selections of consulting firms and partners based on qual's selection and not fee. So they have RFQs that they send out. Oftentimes with government projects, they actually utilize the SF 330 form, which is a standard form that they use to help standardize how the responses are given to them. Other governments utilize similar types of forms. Sometimes they utilize the old SF 330 or 255, 254 form as well. The last type that's most commonly asked for is actually the letter of interest. This is usually the latest of all requests that we get, and it's basically a shorter response that's required, and sometimes it comes out prior to the RFQ so that they can actually shortlist firms to receive the RFP. But all these things have 3 things in common. RFPs are kind of like snowflakes, and that no 2 are identical. Regardless of how long or short, or if they're RFPs or RFQs or even letters of interest, they all have 3 things that they want to know from you. They want to know what you can do for them, why they should hire you, and how well do you understand their need. And how you interpret these needs based on the RFP is what sets you apart. So here's the cold, hard fact that a lot of people don't tell you, but you're going to quickly find out. No RFP is perfect. I have actually literally read thousands of RFPs, and rarely have I seen one that is actually perfect. Most are confusing, illogical, contradictory, jumbled, and use ambiguous language. And if anyone's actually read RFPs, they know exactly what I'm talking about. I've actually heard people kind of shrug their shoulders after reading RFPs and say, well, I'll just give them what I think they want, or I'll just give them what I usually give people. But unfortunately, this is really the wrong approach if you want to win the project. You also have to keep in mind when you're reading the RFPs that it is typical that the person writing the RFP is actually a procurement department or somebody that has absolutely no clue what it is that we do or how it becomes, a project and all goes together. Oftentimes, if you're dealing with a procurement department, they could be writing an RFP for professional services for a food service consultant, and they could also be writing an RFP for purchasing of janitorial supplies. So often when you're reading an RFP, unfortunately, you're going to find that they're full of errors. You will be able to easily find out if they've been copied and pasted, because oftentimes you can see in there references to other projects or other disciplines. So you have to know that going into it. The other important thing to know as you begin to read the RFP and after you receive it is actually what your role is on the project. So As a food service consultant, oftentimes we can approach the RFP from two different angles. The one angle is that we're actually given an RFP and asked to respond to it as what I'll call the prime, meaning that we are the one who will be responding directly to the client on the RFP. The other type that we usually get is an architect has asked us to join their team, and in which case we're reading it as a sub-consultant. It's really important to know which lens you need to be reviewing the RFP with. Oftentimes, we'll get an RFP, and if we're in a hurry, we'll read it thinking that we're responding as a prime, when really we just have to be looking for keywords about sub-consultants, because we're really responding to the architect instead. So now that we've talked about the different types of RFPs and what lens we're supposed to be looking at them through, let's actually dive into reading the RFP. So step one, you may think I'm crazy when I say this and it's obvious, but you really do need to read every single word. I know that sometimes you're busy, and I know that you have client deadlines that you're dealing with and your phone's probably ringing, and you might be tempted to skim the RFP, especially if it's a nice, big, fat, long one. But the reality is, since the RFP covers many facts of the project, and we already went over the fact that they're usually poorly written, it's really important for you to read every word in the RFP, because you might miss important details. I have seen RFPs with scope hidden in strange places in the RFP, the deadline or the timelines hidden in places that are not obvious. I have seen requirements for submissions hidden in there somehow. So it's really important to read the entire RFP from beginning to end. While you're reading the RFP, you kind of have to, put on your Sherlock Holmes hat and actually be a detective of sorts. The RFP can actually give you clues about the project and the client. So for example, if a client is fee sensitive, there might be clues hidden in the RFP that use words that talk about like value engineering or cost saving options. If a client is actually new to writing RFPs and maybe has never been part of this type of project before, they might actually ask you for everything plus the kitchen sink in your response. Have you ever seen an RFP that actually asks you to detail every project you've worked on in the last 10 years? An RFP that is sloppy and is missing key information could actually indicate a client who needs a lot of hand-holding and could actually be a costly client. Another thing that you might be looking for as you're reading through the RFP is if the project is actually wired for somebody. And by wired, it means that the client has already pre-selected somebody, but because of procurement protocols, they actually have to go through the RFP process. So a wired RFP could ask for very specific requirements with regards to a client that you've worked with and a narrow scope of time. They could ask you to be located within a very specific geographic region. They might ask for a crazy number of site visits, or they actually might ask you to hand deliver the RFP proposal to them. There might be other clues in the document as well that you want to look for. Does the client have clues in their writing about having a similar philosophy to you? Does it match the philosophy you have as a company and how you approach projects? Do they ask you to submit questions, or are they closed to the idea? All of these can be clues to what type of client it is and how you want to proceed with the RFP. So step 3, I know I said it once, read every word, and you might be tempted to skip reading the contract language, but you really need to read the contract language closely if it's included in the RFP. Things that you might need to look for in the contract is Does the client ask you to provide them exceptions to the contract within the proposal? Do they ask you to agree to the terms with no exceptions? Are there clauses in the contract that you cannot possibly agree to, such as the indemnification clause or ownership of document clauses? Other key areas that you really need to pay attention to are the insurance limits. Can you meet them? And the payment terms. Is it paid when paid? Is it paid within 30? And some contracts actually have, they will pay you after they hold your money for a certain period of time. All of those are important details that you need to pick up during the reading of the RFP. Other important details to think about as you read the RFP is, I know it's really exciting to pick up work in a new country or a new state, but you need to think about the tax clauses that you might have to agree to. Or if it's a different state than you've ever worked in, you might actually have to register in that state to work. So those are things that you also need to think about as you're reading the RFP. The next step in reading the RFP is actually to carefully read all of the response requirements. I'm always telling my sons there's no dumb question, but with RFPs, there actually are dumb questions. Don't ask questions that demonstrate your lack of knowledge regarding the scope of work requested. Don't ask questions that were answered in the RFP. You don't want to ask any questions that would actually insult the client. And yes, I know it has been done because I've been copied on responses to questions that have been shared with others. And you don't want to ask questions that actually should be asked after you're awarded the project. Questions you should ask should be questions that clarify the scope and intent to help you fine-tune your proposal. When you're reading the RFP, you need to make sure that you have enough information to put together a fee. You need to make sure that you can meet all the submission requirements. You know the locations of the meetings. These are all things that you can ask clarifying questions on. The other thing that you need to remember as you're reading the RFP is you need to make sure that you understand when the proposal is due, how it needs to be submitted. Does it have to be hand delivered? Does it need to be couriered? Can it be emailed? Does it have to be submitted via portal? Do you need to submit it as a PDF or Word document? Are there page limits to the entire proposal? Are there page limits to sections? Sometimes proposals ask you to use a certain size font and line spacing. Are there specific forms that you need to be completed? Do the forms need to be signed? Do they need to be digitally signed or wet signatured? Do you need to have a notary notarize the forms? Does it involve a company stamp? You might want to pick up on cues on interview dates to make sure that you're available to meet those times. Are there any pre-proposal meeting requirements as well? The reality is clients are looking for ways to disqualify submissions, and missing some of the above could be reasons for you to get disqualified. So the other piece that's usually in a formal RFP is they actually tell you how you're going to be evaluated. So you're going to want to look for this information in the RFP. Sometimes it's actually a score sheet that they use when reviewing the RFP. So for example, they could tell you that your firm profile and fee or resumes are all weighted a certain way. Other times they just give you a list of items that they want to see in your RFP and that are going to count in the scoring process. You know, I've actually done sessions that have included staff from university procurement departments, and they've told me that they're reading a stack of RFPs at night over a glass of wine, And depending on how many responses they get, they're looking for reasons to disqualify the RFPs. You also have to keep in mind sometimes these professionals that are reading them are tired and they're looking for easily to digest proposals sent to them. So you're going to have to keep all this in mind as you're thinking about the response to the proposal and whether or not you're going to respond and how you're going to approach it. One of the most important aspects of the reading of the RFP is actually the go, no-go process. So before you decide to just, respond to the RFP, you really need a formal or informal process that makes you stop and think about why it is that you're responding to the proposal. So some of the things that you might typically think of are questions about, is this project one in our wheelhouse? Do we typically work in this market segment? Do we want to work in this market segment? Do we have similar experience? Does my project management staff meet the minimum requirements? Can we as a firm meet the minimum requirements set forth in the RFP? What is the fee potential on the project? Is it part of our strategic plan, and does it align with our goals as a company? Can we actually meet the deadline for the proposal? Can we meet the project deadline? Does our staff have the bandwidth and capacity to meet the requirements of the proposal? Are there any hard pass criteria such as insurance or contracts? What are the repercussions for not submitting? And one of my favorites is, do you have a history with the client? Do you know anything about them? Have you worked with them in the past? Have they been easy to work with, or have they been difficult to work with? Do you really want to work with them again? How are they at paying? Were they paying? Did they pay on time? Were they difficult to get money from? Did you have to chase them all the time to get paid? You could actually call up and start doing research on the client to make sure that it's somebody that you really do want to work with. As food service consultants, we are sub-consultants. So oftentimes we actually are approached to be on multiple teams for architects, which is really great for us because it basically increases our odds of winning the project. But a few words of caution. When you're asked to be on multiple architects' teams for the same project, you need to be very careful to keep the information that you receive from each team confidential and independent. You really should approach each team that approaches you about the same project as unique opportunities. You should never, again, cross-pollinate the information. You shouldn't save the files in the same location. And because oftentimes the architect could be giving you information that is strategic to how they're uniquely approaching their response to the RFP. And you don't want to inadvertently share that information with other teams that you're on. If a team approaches you about exclusivity, you need to take that very seriously and decide whether as a firm you want to give somebody exclusivity or not. So when you're thinking about RFPs and whether or not you want to respond to them and how strategically you want to approach them, you really need to find the sweet spot. So in reality, you shouldn't respond to every RFP that you're asked to respond to. You should selectively choose who you want to work with and the types of projects you want to work on. You need to think about the opportunities that you're given strategically and find out if they actually match up with the strategic goals of your firm. the talent and availability of your resources, and the strengths of your firm. And then those are the ones that you should strategically respond to. So with all that said, about having to carefully read the proposal, read the contract language, the go, no-go decision, and all the different pieces of the RFP, before you respond, you need to stop and think. Because once you respond to this proposal or this RFP and you submit the proposal, you are committing your company legally to this if you win it. So whatever goes in your proposal is legally binding you to this project if awarded, which is why you absolutely need to understand the scope requirements, the programmatic requirements of the RFP. You need to understand the contractual language that you're agreeing to. Because if awarded, and again, the contract is based upon that proposal and your understanding of that information that you should have very carefully have read and agreed to. So, when I was asked to do this, we actually broke apart the reading of the RFP and the responding of the RFP into two pieces. So once you decide to respond and do a go on the response to the RFP and you think about doing a proposal, there are a few things before next month's conversation that you should think about and how you organize your proposal materials. So you should have what I call a proposal toolbox. So you should actually have a very organized marketing file system to help you respond to proposals easily and efficiently. Your filing system should include, your company profile, resumes by segment and geography. They should include projects, portfolios, write-ups on your project, case studies by, market segment and geography. You should have project lists by market segment and geography. You should have photography set up by segments and types of pictures so that you can easily pull that information. You should have templated scoping information that you can pull from. Oftentimes when you're responding to formal RFPs, there's boilerplate information that you're asked over and over again, and then you should already have that saved somewhere in your system so that you're not rewriting it every time. That could include quality assurance and quality control documents, language on scheduling, ownership details, and a bunch of other boilerplate information that's typically asked for in the proposal process. You actually should have proposal templates set up that already include, your footers, headers, your standard fonts, logos, and everything else that you typically use in your proposal. You should have a standard proposal template that you use. You might, in the RFP, be asked to do a specific format, and that's something that you should have identified as you were reading the RFP. The other really important thing, whether it's formal or informal, you really should have a CRM system in place so that you can track the opportunities that you're pursuing, whether you decide to go, no go them, the clients that you've worked with, and have all of that information in an easy to file and find system. So that is really the very quick lowdown on how to read an RFP.
Great. So let's jump in if we have some questions. If you all just use the Q&A feature at the bottom, or you could even raise your hand if you wanted to, and I'll be able to see that. We did have a question come in. When you're reading the RFP or you first received it, what do you think in terms of timing in order to read and really set aside, invest in the RFP? How long do you suggest people plan for that reading time, for example?
You have to look at the RFP, and one of the first things I always do and have trained my marketing team to do is look and see when it's due. Okay. And work backwards. So it depends on what the lead time is on the RFP. You could have as short as 3 days to respond, and you could have up to a month. So you kind of have to take that into consideration when you get the RFP. Honestly, the best practices, and most people are going to really hate when I say this, is you should find time to read the RFP within the first day that you receive it. There's usually in an official RFP, there's a Q&A period, and you need to make sure that you get your questions in during that Q&A period. If there's not an official Q&A period, then you want the opportunity to get your questions in as soon as possible so that you don't delay your decision to go or no go the opportunity, and that you allow yourself enough lead time to put together what you need to respond to it properly.
Okay. So so what are key indicators that an RFP is released just to put pressure on a current supplier to get better pricing, or if it's a real opportunity looking to make a change?
So some of the key indicators are, and that goes back to it being wired. Mm-hmm. If the scope or the qualifications are too narrow, that's an indication that the opportunity is actually wired for somebody else. If the timeline to respond to the RFP is really short, that's another indication that the RFP could be wired for somebody, because somebody else already has a heads up and has probably already started on, thinking about the responses before it was officially released. You can tell when you read the RFP, sometimes by how much or how little information is given. If the RFP asks for a certain set of credentials, you can sort of, once you've read enough RFPs, you can kind of tell which ones are wired for specific people or not.
So I know we're going to talk about how to respond to these in another time, but in terms of those wired proposals, if you realize that that's what this is really going to be about, right? You're reading through it, and it's pretty obvious that that's what this is asking for. Is there, like, at that point, do you make the go, no go decision, or is it better for the firm if you at least, take the time to really think about it and try to win over the business? And do you have any thoughts about that? Or are we going to talk about that next time?
Well, it depends. It depends on how badly you want to try to get in front of the client, whether or not you want to respond and put your name forth. But you need to have a very thought out and well-written proposal, at least to get your name in front of the client as an option going forward.
Should you claim a project to your project list when you're a subconsultant, and when do you clarify that role?
I think I need some clarification on the question.
Okay. This one's from Vince Sims. So why don't you, Vince, kind of flesh that out again and put it into the chat window, and we'll come back to that one. So let's go to the next one. When someone asks you to be exclusive to their team, do you ever do that?
Okay, so I think that has to go back to what your corporate philosophy is and how you approach that as a firm. From my standpoint at Sini Little, we try never to do exclusivity, because I feel that if I tell one client that I'm going to be exclusive to their team, I could be potentially telling 5 other good clients I can't be and pushing them in my competition's direction.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So let's see, what is the protocol when finding out about confidential projects? So how do you find out what architects are going after a project that is confidential?
Okay, so you're kind of jumping in a different direction. So we didn't get into actually lead finding, or I didn't talk about NDAs. So I kind of, NDAs are so common right now that if you're given an RFP and before you're even given the RFP, it's asked you to sign an NDA, you cannot share any information about that RFP with anybody. So as a consultant, if it's a public procurement project and it comes out on one of the public procurement websites, whether it be a university website, a state website, or one of the other public procurement websites, as a consultant, I'm giving you some business development advice. You can call up your clients that work on similar projects and see if they're going to be pursuing those opportunities. However, if you've signed an NDA, you cannot say anything. I mean, when another team comes at you and asks you to be on their team, you have to play dumb. You're not supposed to share any information about that project. You most definitely can't solicit to be on other people's teams for that.
Yeah. So let's see. Oh, so James says that we get added to teams that we do not know about sometimes. So that can get you into trouble.
And James, that is exactly why you never do exclusivity, because the architectural teams can actually keep your information from prior work experience. And it's great for you because they love working with you, and they can actually add you to teams without your knowledge.
Yeah, that is a problem. So thinking about, like you mentioned at the beginning when we were talking about the 3 different kinds of requests, talking about like the different segments that are asking, is there a really big difference in what you're going to expect, say, from a government request versus something you might get from healthcare or college and university, which could be government? So is there something to really watch out for in looking at those proposals, or is there pretty much a standard, they're all pretty much standard and tips apply?
No, none of them are standard.
Yes. Right.
So if it's a government RFP, again, I said that they typically utilize the SF-330, which is a standard form. The SF-330 is a quals-based selection. And basically the whole idea behind it is an apple-to-apple comparison. They're asking everybody responding to the RFP to utilize the exact identical form, include the exact identical pieces, and so it's easier for them to compare and contrast teams. When you get into private, like corporate services, if you're doing, B&I projects, those are typically private funded money. And the RFPs can be all over the place. Those tend to be a lot of the ones that are NDA based because they don't want anyone to know what they're doing with their money. And they can be all over the board as far as how simple they are to respond to or how complex, how much information they want. Universities can be, either simple or difficult depending on if it's private or public.
So do you ever suggest that a firm would maybe provide, maybe on their website or something, kind of a guide as a guide to how to submit an RFP to a client, or is that just something you need to let the client make the decision on?
I don't think I understand the question.
Well, I'm thinking like as as a marketing strategy, you know, the content marketing where we're looking at ways to help our clients come to us, is that something that might be useful on our consultants' websites as here's a great way to submit an RFP, or is that just too much because there's just too many things out there?
One of the things that you're going to quickly notice, and it kind of goes into next week's session, is that when you're responding to an RFP, every client thinks they're unique and you need to approach them in that respect. So you telling them how to do an RFP or how to best approach you for an RFP is not a great idea.
Cool. So another question, when you're a sub-consultant or consultant to an architect and not the direct owner, should you list that project on your project list when the architect was really the client?
So, but the project is yours. So as a food service consultant, often we're subs to an architect and then we're working on the project. Yes, you can absolutely utilize that project on your website. You can use it on your materials, but make sure that you're following the rules of the NDA. I mean, that's another legal document that you really need to review carefully and follow, because the NDA sets out when you can and cannot talk about a project if awarded the project, and it goes into contractual terms that also cover confidentiality of the project and whether or not you can use it. So as long as it's in public domain and you're not breaking the confidentiality, you can absolutely utilize it on your website as a project that you worked on.
Okay. Okay. Well, I don't have any more questions. I'm going to keep it open here for a little bit. If you think of anything off the top of your head now, all of you out there, go ahead and throw us some questions. But in the meantime, we're going to just briefly, we could kind of preview what it is that we're going to talk about in May. And just because we know that this is a two-part session. So we'll just give you, Kathleen, if you don't mind, give us a little heads up about what we're looking for in May, so that people know as we're recording this one, they'll have another one here in a minute to watch as well. So May 14th, May 12th, as you can see, we'll be doing this again. Can you kind of give us a brief heads up?
Yeah, so what we did with this was actually we broke apart I've actually spoken on RFPs before for SCSI, and we didn't actually cover the reading of the RFP as much in that session. We focused more on the responding to the RFP. So in next month's session, we'll do a very deep dive into how to respond to the RFP, both as a prime and that you're responding to the proposal or the RFP request without an architect, or if you're piggybacked on an architectural team, the do's and don'ts of how to respond to that, how to respond to a data call, the format of your materials, all that fun stuff.
So is there anything we should be really paying attention to or thinking about between now and then to prepare?
So, you know, as you're getting RFPs in over the next month, you might be thinking about some of the questions I wish I would have known.
Yeah.
That can be addressed during that call. I will also go over the debriefing process and the interview process on that call. Actually, there's a lot more to talk about on that end of it.
Okay. All right, excellent. Okay, well, this has been really great. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will obviously have this available online. Usually I have them up by next Monday, so keep an eye out for that. Please share it with your colleagues and let them know that these are available for them to watch on demand. As I mentioned, you know, we have our next event with Biz Essentials. It's May 12th at 3 p.m. Eastern. And again, we have our happy hour coming up for those of you who have been attending those. It is this April 28th, which is going to be in 2 weeks. It's at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and there'll be some emails going out with the links to that event. Also, don't forget to check out our On Tap podcasts, which come out every Tuesday. And if you don't have time to watch them full on YouTube, you are also can get them on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, and on Apple Podcasts. So if you're just a listener or you want to listen to it in the car, those are all available. We're up to, I think, episode 14 now. So lots to choose from there. Again, thank you to Continental Refrigerator for sponsoring the Biz Essentials series. It's been a real help to us, and we appreciate their support. And again, all of you, and Kathleen, thank you so much for this. All of you who are getting ready to watch next month's questions, if you want to send a question in when you register, there will be a box on there for you to send the question in advance. So take advantage of that for us too. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you.